true and predicted, and it's true that it's been copyrighted and published, that only our scientists are now validating, that you have to look at it and go, how could that information not be from a truthful, honest source? And then take a look at the rest of the information that they are predicting and say, there's a lot of, this should be looked at seriously for the world, because they are trying to help us understand our world better and help us maybe avoid, world destruction and other problems through this information. But the key is what's in those 6,000 pages, not because we have pretty photographs. So,
well, actually, to date, just to expand on it, Meier actually has transcribed 24,000 pages of information with that one-handed typing, and we'll look at we'll look at a little overview here, but realize that just like you were saying, when you look at this whole thing, I see it as the key to our future survival. Certainly one of the major ones. It's not the only thing on the planet of importance, but it may well contain a key or keys that if we turn those locks, unlock some things and maybe lock some other things up, we get a chance to survive and go through some changes that are going to happen anyhow a little more gracefully, rather than kicking and screaming and losing the farm, quite literally. So, this we were just speaking about. Meier, when he still had two hands, is over on the extreme right, and Issa Rashid is in back, and this guy was his name Prince Polanski? What was his?
Oh, yeah.
The Polish fellow.
Oh, gosh.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. He was in there with his daughter. And Meier is in Pakistan in this photograph in 1964, still has two hands. He's got his weapons on his belt there, his kind of cowboy gear. He took on that name Billy when I think it was a woman from California said that he reminded her of Billy the Kid and some of the Wild West heroes, and he was kind of partial to them anyhow. This is not Wild West, this is just Wild, no West. Wild East.
That's in India. There's his monkey Hanuman.
That's right, with the monkey. Now we have an interesting photograph here from about 1964. The young girl on the right is named Pobol Cheng, and that's her grandfather in the center. Was it Dharma? You remember his name?
He was known as a Cambodian monk, and he founded the
Ashoka.
The Ashoka ashram, yeah.
In India, and he ultimately died a few years ago in California at about 111 years of age. And I think that's her brother. Now the reason this is important is because in 1964, Meier took his first UFO photos, 11 years before the ones that became world famous. This was, let's say, the least distinct but nonetheless quite interesting one. There's 8 lights in the sky. There's a female figure in the lower right hand, which was a woman that was caring for Pobol Cheng as a young girl. This is a more distinct craft. You can see the distance to the sky up there. This is Wendelle has all these on discs.
Ascot is also Play-Arn?
No, she was from the Dal universe, the DAL Dal universe,
Okay.
of the Timar race, a sister race, if you will, to the Play-Arn, who had somehow migrated to this other universe. It's a whole story in that as well. But they're all human, and they look pretty much like we do. Not.
Is this the same camera that he used years later?
I
that
think
broke?
not. Wendelle,
No,
isn't this
no.
a different camera?
No, that's a different camera.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting about this is the Statesman in New Delhi, the newspaper, wrote about him in 1964. The flying saucer man leaves Delhi. So he was getting covered and telling his tale before the official contacts. He wasn't transcribing them at this time. But this gets to be, you'll see in a moment. We go to some places. In 1998, at the Laughlin International UFO Congress, Pobol Cheng, who's now a married, retired UN diplomat from Cambodia, 14 or so years at the mission, came forward. And the reason she came forward, people had been contacting her because they heard about this man, Billy Meier, and the connection to this Ashoka ashram. And she had put behind her long ago anything to do with UFOs, and she wanted to kind of forget this period. She was not looking for trouble in her life. So she felt at that time, and I believe Wendelle was actually at this Congress where she spoke, she got up and basically, in a nutshell, said, I'm here to say this is a truthful man. Not only did I and my brother and my grandfather all see these craft and see Billy Meier, we saw the woman who would walk with him on the grounds, and all of us saw this, and this woman would come in my room at night, and she would sit there sometimes and stroke my hair as I would fall asleep. In the morning, I would wake up, and I had a feeling I knew a lot more about people and things than when I fell asleep the night before. And she said, I just have to stand for this man because he's not lying. And so she went to visit him after that. Wendelle helped.
Let me tell you how I met her. I was doing a lecture in the Pennsylvania Hotel in New York, and I was late. My airplane was late getting in. I hired a taxi to race me down to the hotel because I was going to be on the platform in about an hour and a half. Took me almost that to get there. So I get at the hotel at the downstairs level. By the time I'm supposed to be on the platform upstairs, somebody's trying to hold a platform for me to get up the elevator. And as I'm running down the corridor to the platform, an arm reaches out like this. Mr. Stevens, I got to talk to you. I got to talk to you. And it was a little Oriental-looking woman standing there. I said, I'll be right back. Stay right there. I'll come back. And when I came back, she was still there. She said, I'm Fobal Chang. I was a 10-year-old girl in the ashram when Mr. Meier was there, and myself and my little 8-year-old brother liked to follow him around because he let us play with his monkey. They make the monkey do tricks. I said, monkey? What monkey? She said, he had a monkey. I think its name was Hanuman or something like that. So I wrote Billy a letter and said, I think I met the girl in the ashram, and she said, you had a monkey. Did you have a monkey? You never mentioned that. He said, I did. I had a monkey, and his name was Hanuman. But the girl was telling me that Meier didn't have much to eat there. He didn't have much of an income, and he was just making his way. And she said that he didn't eat very well, but the monkey never went without a meal. I thought that was just great. That's the kind of a guy he was.
Bobo Chang. Now, I put this in because Meier's UFO photos take a number of different kinds of turns, if you will. As opposed to there being just maybe one photo or lights in the sky, which we're used to with most UFO stories, Meier took photos actually of up to 4 of the craft at the same time. This photo is part of when Meier filmed these 3 craft. We have a film on this. I didn't bring that because that's on a I don't even have the copy anymore. Have to get it from Wendelle again, and hopefully they're putting it out on DVD again. But in the film, you see the 3 craft hovering. And what's interesting, when you just pay discrete attention, each of the objects has a slightly different pulse, and they're canted each differently. So if it had been a clever person with a pole with somehow 3 spectacular models, how would he be, creating that and controlling the movement?
Separate motion for each one.
Yeah, they do, and they sort of bounce, and like you say, a pulse,
It's like a pulse in the magnetic
He said it
field.
was like riding on a swell of an ocean.
And 2 of them disappeared at a certain point. Now, I don't know if that was from a cut in the
She
film.
sent them to high stations.
Okay, was that from a cut in the film, or they'd simply go out real quick like that?
We had one clip where it blinks out
Yeah.
in one frame and blinks back on again in another frame.
It's all on this 8. You guys probably
I have that.
You have that. So this is the 3 craft. This is one of the clearer photos. When you start to look at Meier's photos, and you'll be able to compare in a moment, the detail of the craft is unparalleled in terms of, even, we'll get to the talk about models and hoaxing, because that's a whole...
There were 4 different variations. That's a variation 4. This is variation 3.
And look at the dissimilar metals and the contours, the rings, if you will, of construction. Boom, 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 boom. And the flanging and the cupola.
Does it all have technical significance, or is it just like models like we have Chevys and Fords?
I think that they're...
No, they're all special purpose vehicles. They had performed different functions.
But in the notes, it is almost like, she says, I'm getting a new ship. She's
Yeah,
sort of
after
excited.
400 years, she was using a 300 or 400-year-old ship.
That's
a
it
real
did remind me
Chevy.
of a new car
Yeah.
excitement,
Well, but like Wendelle said, they have different functions. So for them, form follows function. Again, another shot with 3 craft, this time with a tripod in the foreground, and each of the craft is angled slightly differently.
Now, is the video camera on the tripod there?
I don't know.
I would imagine
No, it's not.
Oh, it is not?
No, there was a movie camera on the tripod, but on that scene he's got a magnetic detector.
Oh, okay.
Now this is ostensibly taken from inside one of the craft. Meier photographing out through the screen, I think.
They came into 3 ships, Ketzel was piloting one, Semyasi another, and a third in the third one. Semyasi had an empty seat in her ship for him, and the other two took off ahead of the two. So here you see Meier is in Semyasi's ship. That's Ketzel's ship just ahead, and the other one up there is being flown by Isados, I think, the name that we never released.
And here's another shot where you can see a little bit clearer the angle on the ship, a little more of the silver color, and you can kind of almost make out the porthole and the aerial or antenna type of device on it. This one isn't seen too frequently, this photo.
Yeah, I don't remember that
That's
one.
in the same sequence, though.
Yes. Now, I put this up because there's a skeptic named Jeff Ritzman. And Jeff Ritzman is a professional photographer, model maker, and we find out after the fact in an interesting way, he also cultivates miniature trees. So his statement here, I've duplicated and even surpassed Meier's beam ship photos. Mine don't need a bonsai model tree to hold it up. I have a very lengthy presentation on this. I'm giving you the...
Which we've seen.
Yes,
We've been there in
you've
Laughlin
seen all
a
that.
number of times.
I mean, and I can show you, I can go, but I want to just kind of make the points. The skeptics, including, you know who the amazing Randy is, and CFI West, IIG. I just interviewed the skeptic Derek Bartholomew from IIG. And he's saying, Meier used the model tree, it's all the same tree, and it's all, you know, and all that stuff. Well, here's a photo with a couple trees. And by the way, Wendelle, of course, knows this is enormously famous. And there are some different angles of this shot. You can actually overlay some and create a fairly good panorama. And these are not the same species tree. They sure don't look like model trees to me. There can be a debate as to whether the object is in front of a branch or behind a branch or what have you. But there's nothing holding that object up.
And the hill slope, see what looks like a bush there is the top of a tall tree going down the slope, growing out of the slope.
So impossible. Now, this is one of the trees that the skeptics have said, this is all the same tree, right? Well, you can look at this, and I've got some other things I didn't put on this part, but I can always show you. And Meier shot a series. Keep looking at the sky, too. He shot the series of the ship.
And the position of the Pfeffiker Sea behind it.
Yes. I mean,
That's beautiful.
is this some shot? I've got one in here you may not have seen, I think. Oops.
So what, they allowed him to travel around and take it from
the
different
ship is going around.
The
The ship went around twice.
Got it, okay.
So
And
he
he
could
just
get on the
he
background.
changed a little bit of his angle on the from where he was shooting it.
He's walking to his left down the hill.
Right. And again, and again, and again. And we're back there. Now, this is the model that Wendelle had commissioned at MGM. He spent like $400 at the time, if I recall.
Yeah, we didn't commission it. They offered to do it.
Oh, okay.
And then he charged us $400 for it.
Okay, you ended up paying for it.
And what, that was a Hollywood?
Yeah, this was made in the special effects department.
Wally Gentleman was head of the special effects department at the time, and he was interested in the case. He said, let me make you a perfect model and take it over there and suspend it in the scenes.
So that model, you've just seen the model being walked around. Now, I would think that that's the sound of the ship. Now, do you think that that's the same, that Meier made a model? Look at the lights flash on and off of that. Do you see that?
There's also a bubble that raised up on the bottom and then went down.
Point being, the model hypothesis is so defeated. The skeptic named Jeff Ritzman, who cultivated miniature trees, could not present one photo with his model next to a miniature tree, or would not because he knew in his heart of hearts that Meier did not have models and miniature trees. This is the famous wedding cake ship.
Now, is it on the ground there?
It is.
I mean, doesn't that look pretty goofy?
Yes,
does. It looks
looks
terribly
very
goofy.
goofy. And guess what? Well, you know, Lee told me this story, and I'm sure I think you mentioned once too. Metallurgist was consulted about this. Can you make one of these for me? And the guy said, well, how big do you want it? And it's, he says it's about 3 meters. He says, yeah, I can make it. Well, what would it cost? And Lee said that the guy said to him, it'll cost you $25,000. Now, you guys knew that Meier didn't have a metallurgist and $25,000 in 1980 money lying around. So look at a couple more. But look at the objects that can be seen on the rim. There's about 100 things that look like gems or crystal.
It looked like ruby cabochons.
Yeah, and all of this. Let's go next. There you can see, at this point, you can see the base better on which it's sitting. And a distant shot, which the skeptic is going to try and tell you is the same model tree. Well, they also say it's a garbage can lid. However, the garbage can lid is made out of plastic. Nobody will accept the challenge to make one of these. Jeff Ritzman tried with a cake pan. It was so pathetic. Basically, he's forbidden me to show his efforts to duplicate Meier's stuff. This is a professional model maker. He said, you may not reproduce, you may not show, you may not display my photos. Well, these people have been saying Meier's hoaxing. Why not let the world see your...
Has he shown them anywhere?
On a couple websites. And as soon as I put them up, and I put them up on my website in an article, and I also showed them in Toronto. I made a presentation at the Ontario Science Centre. And I let him know that we were doing this, and he was yelping, and then finally he sent a letter. It'll be a copyright violation if you display my photos. I said, well, what's your problem? You claim that Meier's hoaxed this. Why don't you just let the world judge for itself? Well, he didn't want to have any part of that. So, watch this. You think that's a model tree about 100, 200, 300 feet away? Meier walks back behind the video camera. And now just be patient.
Now you're going to zoom in?
Yep. He zooms in on it. You can hear the motor working on this early thing. Now, if that's an 18-inch model tree and a 14-inch model UFO, I will eat it. Now watch what happens when he zooms back. He stops where he starts, but then he takes it back just a little more. Billy, if you would. Now look at the distance. We can think that that's the cheesiest looking thing we've ever seen, but I defy you that that's a model.
If it's suspended, the pole has to be a 200-foot long pole.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now this one drives the skeptics absolutely crazy. They claim that this is nothing more than a light photographed against a black backdrop, then it's superimposed in a deliberate double exposure. I had a friend of mine who's been in the film business for 50 years, who's a total skeptic about UFOs. Doesn't believe in it, doesn't want to hear about it. So I showed him the photo, and I told him what this other skeptic, David Biedny, said about this. David Biedny's a Photoshop expert, and this is a deliberate double. And the guy said to me, he says, I'll tell you something. He says, I've done special effects, I've done all sorts of stuff. I don't know what it is, but it's not a, let me see if I put the other photo on here. Yeah, this is the one that Biedny says is a double exposure. Now I'm going to show you something interesting, if I may. You see this here? You notice it's repeated here and repeated one more time. My buddy picks up on this and he says, this is a triple exposure. And he says, more than likely, this is an in-camera accidental triple exposure. Maybe the guy, whatever this is, maybe he's excited. And somehow he's clicking or he's not forwarding the film or whatever. And he said, look, if your skeptic thinks that this is a light fixture, tell him to duplicate it. It was just that. The guy refused. But this is the way the skeptics are. They will make all their claims and accusations, and they will not belly up to the bar.
You have the next one with out over the valley with a beam of light coming down?
Yeah, I didn't put that on because that's less, what do you call it, less in terms of reference points and other objects and all. So now it gets weirder. In June of 2004.
Wait a minute, before you go to that.
Sure.
I have the whole sequence of pictures. You have one with it showing it with the orange light on it in there?
With the orange.
Over the driveway or above the house?
No, I only have these two. That one?
No, the wedding cake picture.
Oh.
Orange one.
Oh, no, I didn't put, I probably have that on another thing. I can bring it up.
Okay, the sequence I'm talking about starts high above the house and above the tree line, and it's just a little squiggle of orange light, like just a movement. The next picture in the sequence, it's like a little inverted question mark. The next one is starting to get some shape coming down. The next one down is a little bit more shape. The fifth one down is getting reasonable shape. You know it's looking just like the one that hovered over the driveway. Then the next one down, it's above the roof line of his house and below the tree line behind it. Then the next one, it's at the roof line of the house, and you can see it's still orange, radiating orange light. Now, he had a street lamp in front of his house that has the bulb that shines down, it shows orange light. But this is above the street lamp and above the house and above the trees and above everything, coming down until it's below the roof line and then hovering over the driveway. And all that sequence, if you see the rest of the sequence, you're going to wonder how in the world did he ever get the rest of the series? And they were all in numerical order on a strip of film.
There's 63 photographs of the wedding cake show. Now, you probably know from being in film, TV, and all this stuff, to set up a model shot, to set up one good model shot, indoors, let alone outdoors, you have to take some considerable amount of care, and you have to have some, at least probably 2 good hands. Meier took 63 photos in that series. And when Wendelle and the investigators went to, as did Gary Kinder, spoke to the people at Bar Photo, and they even asked them, well, did you ever see any things that look like setups or accidents, bad shots? They said, no, it brings it in, we get the strip of film back, and there's one after the other. They're all just perfect. And the films. So you're dealing with a phenomenon here, it's a little unusual. Now with this, when I went over in, let's see, when was it? Probably in May of 2005 is when I think I first saw the handprints. 7-fingered handprints that are etched into the surface of the hood of a car. And you're going, okay, what's this about? Well, you can make out the papillary lines, the fingerprints, the swirls in the hand. And Meier said, I asked him, I said, well, this is kind of unusual. Would you let any scientific examination take place? He says, well, of course, just don't destroy the car. Well, let's take a look at some of it. This is a shot of the parking lot, and this is either the actual car or one very similar. It's a Subaru wagon of Atlant, a stepson of Meier's. I'll bend down here so I can just operate this for now. Now, here's Billy with a film crew in 2000, I think 2005 they came over. This guy Stephen Kemp from WAG TV. And he's showing him the handprints and getting closer. Now, if you look, you'll see, here you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You'll see 2 elbow to wrist to hands here, another one here, another one here. And when you look at this, this is etched into the finish of the car. Now what I did is I went and I investigated what the moon was like on that night. Why? Because if somebody somehow is going to go out, and there's also handprints on the side of the car, and etch this in, they need a light source. Not only do they need a light source, they have to somehow foil the natural alarms, which are the night watch, where people walk around the property at night with flashlights. They used to walk around with rifles too. And the peacocks on the property that they've got as natural sound alarms for anybody coming up. They also have graveled the entire road, so any vehicle coming up or anybody foolish enough to start to walk makes a sound. And okay, on that night there was no moon. It was a new moon, meaning it was dark.
No peacocks?
No peacocks. No gravel. Nobody with a light. In the morning, somebody's walking by Atlant's car, and this kid he's in Tasmania studying, so his car is just sitting in the parking lot. That's Billy's hand on the right, so you can get a scale on this a little bit. They have lasted, when I was just there in September, they were still visible, and they appeared on another car, on a new Volvo.
Well, what are they?
I'll tell you in a second. So you can see that's Klaas, the Swedish guy, put his hand down for comparison. Okay, I'll go back to this. What they are is this, according to them, 2 small people who took over the watch for the Plejaren, the 2 people who generally do the monitoring. They always have a 2-person team monitoring the planet. And these 2 people were relieved for a while. They had somewhere to go, something else to do. And Yapril and, I forget the other one's name, maybe it'll come to me, a man and woman of a different group, not Plejaren, who are associated with the Federation of the Plejaren people, They are about this tall, a light greenish tinged skin with a chemical composition that produces a corrosive effect on a lot of the things in our chemical world. Meier claims he met them twice. The first time he wanted to shake hands with the guy, and Patah said, "Don't do that. It's a bad idea. You know, you got one hand, you want to use it." So Billy says, "Okay, but I want to at least touch fingers." So he said they reached out and they touched fingertips, and I said, "What happened?" He says, "It burned for a week." He said it's really like acid. They have this very strange, composition, and they are in part of the Federation with the Plejaren people. They are benign little people, relatively speaking, and I guess as a kind of a joke, they decided to lay their hands on Etland's car, and so Etland comes back from Tasmania. He's got these weird handprints all over it, and they're still visible a couple years later, 2.5 years later. I mean, this is the kind of bizarre stuff that goes on. Now, Wendelle before was talking about the contact when Meier's talking to Semyaze, and she's starting to tell him about ozone damage and what have you. Well, this precedes that by 24 years. In 1951, I think, unless I jumped here, no, we're okay. Meier wrote a letter in 51 that he sent around. I think he sent 3,000 copies of this letter around the world at Svath's encouragement with the help of a teacher, Lehman, Professor Lehman or Herr Lehman. And there were a good number of very specific warnings about what was coming to our world. This is 1951. Through the guilt of the people, all storms will assume increasing and more violent forms, such as hailstorms, blizzards, and flooding rains, and so over. The ozone layer will become very dangerously damaged. He goes on to speak about some of the other weather and environmental things that are going to happen. This is 55 years ago. Now, and I'll jump a little. In the contact reports, when Meier was talking about the Jupiter information, which we'll get to, I recall when I read the contact report, he says something to Semyaze about, well, I remember from 1951 you told me about, and I'm thinking, where's this 1951 information? Finally, they released the letter. So next we get, I'm sorry that's not as visible as it could be. This is, okay, this is 86, and he asks them about the global warming. Is this actually only alone attributed to the environmental destruction and such of human beings? Now this is interesting because, do you want to read it yourself or you want me to read it? I don't care.
Read it.
Okay. Yeah. Quetzal says the warming of the earth is not just an effect which is caused by environmental and atmospheric pollution by earth human beings. The greenhouse effect in the running form of pollution is also to be attributed to particular occurrences and processes which on the sun become evident, and their effects also become apparent on Earth. As a result, not only will the layers of atmosphere of the Earth warm up, but also the atmospheres of all of the other planetary objects of the Sol system, which is something scientists have been saying now to try to counter Gore, but look what they're saying. In addition, the Earth itself generates in its interior great heat radiations, which accordingly penetrate outwardly and help with the greenhouse effect. The innermost Earth, that is, the center of the Earth, is not simply a solid mass, like is incorrectly presumed by the Earth scientists, but exists there a similar core like which the sun, taken as a whole, presents. Therefore, a bubbling atomic burning furnace, says Billy, and Quetzal says that's a good comparison. Now, this is important because we have the first mention by Meier in 51 of damage to the ozone, heating of the planet, etc. In 86, 21 years ago, they're saying, yes, this is a real concern, this is really happening, but it's not all due to humankind. However, it's exacerbated. Now, in 86, he also says, however, how is it now with the climate of the Earth? It is said indeed always that it is warming up. Will it actually warm even more? The year of 2001 will be the warmest of the last 200 years, says Quetzal, and the global climate warming also will afterwards still continue. On the one hand, occurs this warming already for decades through entirely natural processes and phenomenon of the Earth and Sun, like I already previously once explained, and on the other hand, also through the foolish exertion of influence of Earth humans on the climate, through air pollution and the resulting accompanying generation of a greenhouse effect. Now, 2006, just last year, Billy says, still something because of the weather. Winter is keeping us waiting, as you said in our last meeting, as however also that the climate changes ever more rapidly. Can you still briefly say something about that? Ptah, the alleged leader of their race, says, the climate warms even faster, whereby the snowfall is also absent ever more frequently in the deeper sites, while the Earth's polar ice masses, as well as the glaciers, melt ever faster, which leads to this, that by the year 2100, in some cases, the water of the seas will rise up to 160 centimeters, or 5 feet 3 inches. Forceful natural changes have become unstoppable. Consequently, there is also a general change in the world of animals, birds, fish, and the entirety of the fauna, as however also regarding the flora, because already it is all changing and is beginning to adapt to the new conditions of nature. Thus, it is also the case with the migratory birds which remain in their home areas in winter and are no longer drawn to other domains. It is the same with migratory animals because their pasture lands are changing and everything is taking on new forms.
This is 2006, but
Yes.
I mean, you know, there are other people saying that
Absolutely.
stuff in
But in
2006.
1951,
Okay, tell me this. How do I know that
that was published then.
It was published then?
Yes, well, how do you know is
Yeah,
it's
how
a
do I know?
legitimate question. Meier ostensibly in 51 sent 3,000 copies around the world through Mr. Lehman, his professor helped him, or his teacher. Now, I'm going to hold that question because it's a question you can apply to a few things here, and I'm going to give you a way to answer that question for yourself. In 1975, in Contact 35, after the first time that Semyazi supposedly tells Meier about the ozone damage, she says that the A-bomb explosions produce what they call ultraviolet elementary radiations, the high ultraviolet for which we do not even have equipment to detect at this time. Damages the ozone layer, creates magnetic disturbances, polar displacement, et cetera, et cetera. Now, here's where I can start to establish some proof in my own experience. It may not work for anybody else. In 1986, I met a guy in a little cafe in Sedona, Arizona. We got to talking. Next thing I knew, he gave me the first translations of the contact notes, which were kind of with the German influence. The verbs are at the end and very primitive, but you could read it. All right. I read this information in there. I'm going, this is 86. I'm going, well, there's a lot of information here. This is fascinating, but what do I do with it? And I put it away for a couple years. Until 1988, when I opened the newspaper, and there's this news file, new discovery from Livermore Laboratory saying A-bomb testing tied to ozone depletion, and they publish a percentage of about 5%. As Wendelle pointed out, Meier was told it was actually 6.38% in 1975. Well, this is 88 now. So I look at the article and I go, well, why do I think I already know this information? How could I know this already? And a little reach under the bed, the first 100 pages, Contact 35, Contact 7, what have you in there. And then in I think it's 1990 or something, ozone hole damages food chain. She told him all about this. The ultraviolet's going to penetrate through the holes in the ozone created. It's going to create genetic mutations and damage the food chain. New discovery comes out in the LA Times. But it comes out 17 years after Meier's already published it. I have those documents in my hand in 86. This is coming out after that. So we then get this. In 1976, Semyazi says, that is to be understood in this way, that Earthman exploits his planet and robs it of the fundamental life energy, in that he robs from it the underground oil and gas and the most diverse ores. This leads to the fact that the Earth suffers shifts within, which leads to enormous volcanic eruptions and earthquakes, because slowly the Earth collapses from within. That's 1976. Now in 51, remember, he'd already written about all this different stuff, and if we go over the letter, which you can from my website for free, you'll see he's talking about the tectonic damage.
Does anyone save a letter? They got a postmark or a date, or is there, if they sent 3,000?
You know, with this one, I don't know, but hold on.
The 1951 letter, I mean.
They claim that they have like a restored, preserved version of it. I haven't seen it yet.
He was 14 or 15 years old at the time.
Wow.
He was born in 37, okay?
the last discussion he had with Ketzel on the deterioration of they told him that the ionosphere is so badly destroyed now that mutation has already begun, and human life, or all life on the planet, will be different 100 years from now.
Yeah, from genetic damage, mutation.
Really?
Yep. Here in 51, in this
Irreversible now.
in this letter, he starts off not only wars, terror, destruction, et cetera, all this. Monstrous overpopulation will be to blame, as all natural laws will get thrown out of kilter. So they're saying that at the core of this, and this is a big part of what the Meier case is about, they're saying because we have irresponsibly allowed our population to so exceed a reasonable bound, we're producing through our consumption, even through the exhalation of all the carbon dioxide, the pollution from all the machinery and cars, we're contributing and exacerbating the natural global warming, things like that. Now, he talks here again about all the storms increasing and all, and then he also says the ozone layer will become very dangerously damaged. And then back to the deluges and the floods and all of this stuff. This was from 1990. I opened the newspaper, and here's Dr. Paul Siegel from Stanford connecting up the extraction of petroleum and natural gas to earthquake and volcanic eruption. I already had the documents in my possession for 4 years. In 77, the earth will not come to rest. They speak about earthquakes coming. Nations and islands will sink. Severe droughts, flooding, etc. Okay, this is a little of the doom and gloom stuff, but there's a reason, and not to beat the doom and gloom drum, but remember in the beginning I said there was a reason we get these prophecies. Let's look at what some of them are. Okay. The monstrous mass and weight of the cities and villages continuously stress the inner structures of the earth more and more, through which the tectonic plates will be adversely affected, inevitably leading to increasing tectonic displacements and faults, through which immense tremors will be evoked worldwide, etc. So compounding, we overbuild our cities. And damming of water is another situation where we take an area that isn't quote unquote naturally made for putting millions of tons of mass, and we cause a dam to hold huge amounts of water. Now, in the same letter, he talked about the rise in terrorist extremism, neo-Nazism, prostitution, worldwide, children being thrown into it. He also says, in number 35, televisions already invented will belong to every family and as well to everyday life, as will the technology of the computer, which is already being worked on diligently in America, Germany, Japan, and the Soviet Union. The television and the computer will become the most important information media, however, also as significant forms for the public advertising and prostitution.
34 particularly fits Las Vegas.
Yeah, taxable. Now this one is from 58, allegedly. Number 6, out of 160 specific ones. In Iraq, a war will be led through the United States of America, through which their country's president, however, this will be without success, for which reason one of his sons, who will likewise be the USA's head of power, will in the 3rd millennium unleash a second war in Iraq, which will ultimately lead to an unbelievable disaster and to torturing as well as to mass murder through U.S. armed forces and the rebellious. And then
Look at the date now.
Yeah.
And then in number 23, because of unrestricted prostitution, in about 25 years, an already embryonic deadly epidemic will develop worldwide that will be named AIDS and will finally cost several hundred million human lives.
Same thing. So 1958,
right.
he sends out as a letter.
Yes.
does
This one was only
anybody-
sent, this was 20 to the 25 European governments.
And does anybody have a copy of that one?
They apparently in Switzerland do. I'll have to look. Now,
I mean, that's pretty big. I mean, if
absolutely,
if you
absolutely.
could prove that, that's pretty big.
Well,
Well, you're going back there.
I'm going back in a few weeks. We'll talk about the
There's
letter.
one other thing I'll bring up too. Remember, he was told to write a letter to a Harvard or a
The Harvard professor, Michael McElroy, and when we sent the team down there to analyze the whole of English and discovered 2 years later, guess who headed the team? Michael McElroy from Harvard. Same guy.
When you sent a team to analyze what?
When the English discovered the hole in the ozone layer, and they
Oh,
sent
okay.
a team down,
Well,
that was 2 or 3 years after he.
Did you talk to him about that letter? Did anybody ever try to ask him about that letter? Because
Ask
he
him.
did send the letter, right?
He sent the letter to Harvard University. He never got it back, so he assumes that Michael McElroy got it.
But nobody ever tried to contact him.
McElroy. No, you know the problem. You've got a problem when you go to scientists who are at a high level. And I'll tell you one of the things that happened when I get to the Jupiter page, because I contacted a scientist, and it shows you how it works when you get to them. This is from the 58 prophecies that we were just looking at, and he speaks about overpopulation, climatic warming becomes apparent, blah, blah. The third millennium, more than 7 billion people will be on Earth. Nature will strike back in vengeance, and the human undertakes everything which is destructive to the environment and life. Now this is a kicker, because in 58, and it will be that the fanatical Islamists' bloody revenge on the distant descendants of the Christians for the earlier crucifixions by the Christians will come into being when they accomplish their deadly and destructive acts through irrepressible terror all over the world. Let me just stop for 1 second and jump over to something that's more recent that I don't have up here, but what they said to Meier was, terrorism cannot be defeated militarily. You have to have another approach to it. Now, it's not they're not pacifists, and Meier's not a pacifist. Meier showed us his gun cabinet. We've got him displaying every one of his lovely handguns, his Kalashnikovs, and the whole thing. Among the things that they say are this. First of all, if we don't want the Third World War, America has to withdraw from Iraq to begin with, or we get it. Now, we'll go on farther about what we get out of that if we are foolish enough to allow it. They said the way you put down the terrorism, the way you prevent this is through a true international global peace combat force, not the UN. It has to be structured, drawing equally from all of the countries, whereby you have soldiers who are trained and armed, they're not blue-helmeted walking targets, and as soon as you identify a place and the people that are causing an uprising, revolution, war, terrorism, they're warned that they must stop right away. And if right away they do not stop, the force en masse is sent there. They don't bomb the country into oblivion. They go to take out the people who are, promoting causing the trouble. If those people fight, and they fight back, and if those people are killed, there's no karma. In other words, this isn't about we can only arrest them. The goal is to take into possession those persons, to have them tried through a true international court under international law, and the punishment is not capital punishment with them, and they said it shouldn't be with us. Well, how do you punish people that are this evil? You isolate them to an island, basically kind of the old Australia idea. You do not give them Club Med. They don't have internet and cable. They have the basic tools of their survival, and they get to live out their lives to dealing with the consequences of their actions, removed from danger. Now, people can say, well, this is so idealistic and blah, blah, blah. Well, if what the Plejaren is saying, the alternative to being reasonable and coming together to put these things in their proper perspective is that we suffer unparalleled destruction primarily here.
Have you asked Meier about the terrible disaster it's going to follow the second Iraq War? What
you mean when he says leads to an unbelievable disaster?
Yeah.
In May asked Meier, I said to Billy last year, Billy, at this time we were talking about attacking Iran, and Israel or America might attack Iran. If you remember, there was a lot of saber rattling a year ago. And I said, what's this, this thing about attacking Iran, either the US or Israel? And I said, I'm curious because in the prophecies it says that Russia will invade Iran. And he said, well, I can tell you this. Your government is so unstable and the people are so turned over in their minds that from an hour to hour we don't know what they will do, but we will tell you that if your government, if your country attacks Iran, your country will be attacked by Russia and China. Now, he didn't say right away, he didn't say how, but as you know, because you have some familiarity with prophecy, it does talk about attacks from Russia and or China. And those things were spelled out in direct language and also in kind of poetic language. So I said, well, what about Israel? And he said, well, do you remember what it says in the prophecies about Israel? I said, yeah, the blood in the land of Israel will be as high as the boots. I said, is that China? And he says, yes. So we come back to what the brothers Bax were speaking about before with the Talmud Emmanuel, where Emmanuel, the man we know as Jesus, is excoriating the Hebrews of the time. And he's doing a lot of the you generation of vipers and all of this. And he's saying, as you have persecuted the prophets before me, and as you will persecute me, and as you have, and you and your ancestors have stolen these lands from the rightful owners, your people will know no peace until the end of time, unless your distant descendants make a just peace with the distant descendants of the rightful owners of these lands. And he says, because I tell you now that 5 centuries from now comes another man who will be a true prophet. But his teachings will be falsified, as will mine, and an evil cult will be formed around it. And they will give your people no peace till the end of time, and he will be called Muhammad. This is in the Talmud, the same one that's got the oil fire. Did we talk about the oil fires yet? We didn't talk. Oh, okay, I will get there. Now, this is on how do we know when things are really written and published, right? Well, there's a few ways. Now, I'm going to jump around a little to try to tie this together. You see the numbers here. This is unique because this was Meier's own document that he numbered. But when we had the other, let's see what's next here. Okay, it's more Meier stuff, but when Meier would transcribe the contact reports, and to this day when he transcribes them, he has to number every sentence spoken to him by one of the ETs. And he in 75 said, why do I have to bother with that? And he said, because in the future, you are going to be accused of falsifying. People are going to say you've gone back in to make yourself look like a psychic person or something, and that you've falsified this. But because your transcripts are going to be disseminated not only to your small group, but our ever wider group of people, not only in German, but in other languages, the times will come when people start to compare, and they'll see that contact 115, sentence number 21, is the same in English and German and everything else, and with thousands of pages out there, people will start to realize you could not have gone back.
So there are predictions that have not come true or not
Correct.
have been disproven that are already publicly available.
Yes.
Yes,
And a lot of them for free.
And ostensibly, some of the most pertinent to us for the here now were given in '87, and in '87 they ostensibly said the destruction of the World Trade Center will be just the beginning. Unfortunately, that was not published until
Right.
5 years ago, maybe.
In 2002, that's right.
Okay, now and
Well, for a very
also,
good reason.
Right.
They pointed out early on that they're giving him the predictions as a kind of a measure of time, because they don't have time as we think of it. So that you might call it event time, that events follow in a certain order in the evolution of the planet and its societies. And so they were giving these timeline events that would happen, and one helps the next one along. They occur in sequence because they build on each other.
you would find it rather interesting that they criticize Bush, Rice, and Cheney by name.
Years ago, before they were sitting in that position.
Yeah.
Well,
They do with Bush, but Rice is more recent.
but they were criticized. I mean, I see this about George Bush the son, but isn't it only since he's been in office or right before he was in office that they were?
86, they mentioned Bush.
But again, is that one that was not published
It wasn't
anywhere?
published
Right.
until
And-
02,
and-
but
Yeah.
the ones that are in 02 and since then that are rather current, they're, you know, you'd almost think Pelosi would get a hold of this material and publish it. I mean, I'm wondering, it's curious why the Democrats haven't jumped on this.
Well, I can tell you. Politics doesn't operate by principle. It operates by advantage. So we operate under political systems, and political systems are geared to perpetuate careers and power. They're not geared to perpetuate or let alone seek or identify truth. So when you have a bill, let's say through Congress, you notice that people put in other things. Now that's political. If we operated on principle, we would say, what principles can we as humanity agree on are worth, they're universal, they're true for all people. Therefore, we may disagree as to how to get there, but we're not going to trade favors to say, I'll go towards the truth for you if you give me mine, if you give me this, if you build this thing or that thing. Because that is already, cause and effect is an eternal law of the universe. It's immutable. We cannot defeat cause and effect. We either learn from it or we get defeated by our ignorance of it. By compromising truth and compromising principles for advantage, it's a form of lying. So one of the things they can't do, when they know there's a difference to them between prophecy and prediction. Prophecy is the likely outcome of the cause up until now as we know it, unless something has changed. A prediction is something set in stone that must occur. Now, they claim that they have several means of determining predictions and prophecies. Mm-hmm. Some are, we might say, they have people that they claim that are seers, very advanced seers themselves. They have computers. Don't forget, we have prophets all over the place. You ever work with a weatherman? A sportscaster, a financial analyst, an astronomer, a flight engineer? These are people, everybody takes information and crunches it to create the outcome based on what we know. They, if they exist, are at a higher level. Their computers are at a higher level, so they can crunch even more data than we're aware of at any one time and make a projection on it. And then they claim the ability to travel through time under certain circumstances and conditions and permissions from even higher authority. They can make trips into the past or future. The things that are predictions, apparently the World Trade Center was a prediction. It had to happen. Had they published it, and the reason they don't publish certain predictions, our natural instincts, if we find out some terrible thing is going to occur, I'm not going to let that happen, right? Now with a prophecy, that's a good attitude. We don't want that to happen, like the Enoch prophecies about the destruction of America. My personal mission in life is to help to prove some of these prophecies wrong. It's not about UFOs. I could care less. I'm not going to get a UFO in this lifetime. I start to see what this is about. Well, you can't publish all this suddenly in Pelosi's and other people because their fear of their credibility. And let's be honest, you know what it's like. You've got a position in the media. You're going to walk out and say, well, we just sat in a meeting and America's going to be hit by this and that. Okay, click, and there goes the ratings and the rest of it. But there's a reason we're here. We have to become aware of certain information and then decide for ourselves what reality is and what we can do about it. So when you look at this, where Meier, allegedly in '58, is talking about terror commandos will live secretly in cities worldwide, blah, blah, blah. Now, you could say, well, why would somebody now write something like that, or why would somebody in 1958 write something like that? Where was the issue about terror commandos living in cities? We're not really even talking about that, except recently we're talking about cells of terrorists. He calls them terror commandos. And here, you know, he's castigating again the US and Israel. Now, this gets interesting in terms of how do you prove something. In, let's see, where are we? 81. Italy and France will be shaken due to revolutionaries who murderously and by arson destroy every order. Paris will be destroyed from within and burnt down. The inhabitants themselves are those who lay Paris into rubble, blah, blah. 1987, a very similar thing, except he then identifies them as belonging to the Islamic faith. Now, here's a place where I can tell you the following. In 1986, Randy Winters had the prophecies, the Prophetine, and the 1981 prophecy was in there, among other things, which I'll get to. And I'm reading this, and because also in the prophecy in 81 it says the United States of America will suffer 2 civil wars and be divided up into 5 territories ultimately. And I'm going, the U.S. Civil War? What's this about Paris burning? Well, you know that a year ago in October and November of, I think, 2005, there were very severe riots in Paris from the Islamic inhabitants of Paris.
Burning cars in the street, burning buildings.
3,000 plus cars were destroyed. People
One
were
night,
murdered.
yeah.
That's right. And that also spread not just to Paris, but in a number of other places. And it has actually continued intermittently since then. The news is low on it in this country, but I've read European news where they periodically they're having another uprising here or there. Now, people say to me, well, Paris wasn't burned down to the ground. And I said, well, there's a 3-letter word called yet. And I hope that they learned from it and from whatever excess that they will do whatever they have to do to not have Paris burned down. But as you also know from the prophecies, not only do they say that Paris will be burned down, France will fall first from within, apparently to Islam, and then apparently Russia comes in. And not only does France then fall to Russia, but Russia takes control and command of the French armed forces and uses it as another arm of invasion for Scandinavia and England and other places if those prophecies mind you, are true or bear out. Now, so in 1981 and 87, well, I read that first in 86, then I read the 87 one, 2002, and I put it out on a DVD. Excuse me one second.
Anybody need a bathroom break?
Now, you guys have this, right? Oh, that's my song one.
No,
That's something
your
else.
song.
That's for you.
That one I have, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So you guys have that one. George doesn't have it. And Wendelle, I don't know if you ever had it. This is the Meier context. You guys can have that too. That's just separate.
Thanks.
No, I haven't.
That's everything. But okay, this I did in 2004. And in this DVD, I reported on that. I also reported on what Meier said about Islam will sweep across Europe. The church will fall, the this, the that, all the rest of the stuff. So just even pointing to this information, which was fulfilled to a very high degree in 2005, it's already on this in 2004, as are other pieces of prophecy. So what I want us to just consider is this. It'd be very easy if we could get every letter and every document and say, see, it was published then. But they are making us work through this, so there's always plausible deniability. And James Dierdorf was the guy that came up with this plausible deniability thing. Just when you want to slam dunk it, well, there's this weird thing that lets the skeptics out the door, because if these people exist, they could prove their existence in 3 minutes. It wouldn't take them 65 years. The violation of free will, the throwing us into panic, psychosis, worship, attack, would set the whole evolutionary process here back considerably, and it would be their karma, again. So their forefathers, and if we look at this idea of reincarnation, some of these beings are obviously the reincarnates of ones who screwed us up in the first place, using that kind of system, call it a belief system because we can't prove reincarnation. Let's just say that they don't want to do it again, whoever they may be. Now, this is the one we were speaking about before a little bit in the car. Meier was taken, he claims, on a trip to Jupiter in 1978, which he refers to in this document as the second time he had this information. Apparently somewhere in the 50s, they also gave him this information, and I can't find it, but he refers to it. So this is that tricky thing. Now, again, I had this in 86. In this document, Meier is in this spaceship with Semyaze, and he's describing what he's seeing to her, kind of reaffirming what she had told him. Yes, I see, Jupiter does have rings, like you said it did. And there's Europa, and it's encrusted in ice. Oh, and the storm on Jupiter, it moves counterclockwise. How interesting. And you told me that it's really helium, mainly helium, and deeper in it's this and that. And
Cyclone, big cyclone.
Big cyclone in the storm. And then he says, and there's Io. I remember you told me Io is the most volcanically active body in the solar system. And he goes on to describe not only the volcanic activity, the composition of the ejecta coming out of the... He says, as I recall, these are dust particles and ionized sulfur, and they're spewed up over 180 kilometers up, some of which, if it doesn't escape the gravitational or the atmosphere of the moon, fall back down, accounting for the uncharacteristically smooth surface of Io, right? Instead of craters, it's very smooth and just these volcanoes, but the rest of it, he says, is taken up into a ring of sulfur as sulfur particles, ionized sulfur. So Wendelle has this document in his possession for certain on March 9th, 1979. That's 4 days after the Voyager probe gets there and they make their first discoveries. 4 days earlier, they're making their discoveries in the US about the rings of Jupiter. And Europa is encrusted with ice. 3 days after Wendelle has it, on March 12th, 1979, JPL NASA makes an announcement. Our most important discovery of this mission, Io is the most volcanically active body in the solar system. Okay, some skeptic says, well, Wendelle's in collusion with Meier and they cheated it. But there's another little funny thing that happens in the magazine called Science, April 1980. They come out with this finding. Let me see if I put it on here. Yes. Here, Meier says the rest you explained would be pushed out into space while a part of it is drawn by Jupiter and very slowly densifies in its ring to a heavy sulfur-ion combination. Then, it's corroborated in Science magazine. Images of the ring of singly ionized sulfur encircling Jupiter obtained on 2 successive nights in April 1979 show that the ring characteristics may change dramatically, blah, blah, blah. And it talks about the magnetic equator inside Io's orbit, so it's connected to Io. Again, sulfur plasma, blah, blah, blah. But it's published, pardon me, in January of 1980. Wendel's already signed off on this document with 2 other people, O. Richard Norton from the Flandre Planetarium and Major Rudolph Pestalozzi, U.S. Air Force retired, correct? We are hoping Wendell will find, they literally read this and signed off on it after in first or second week of March. But that's not all. And I don't have it on, I'll move around and then we'll get back to that document. So here we have Billy doing his one-handed typing now.
At the same time that he was taking down these communications from the Pleiadians, he was receiving transmissions from Erhat Athasata, which is a thick book about the Old Testament history, and another one from the